Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for May 5th, 2021. Today is Saturday, May 1st, 2021. Um, Personally, we've had an interesting week. Um, Nathan, Lee, and Carmen have been looking for a house to rent for several months and been very frustrated by the process. But this week they found one, they've signed the lease, and as of today, Nathan managed to move out enough that he's going to stay in the place tonight. It's going to take them a while to move the rest of their stuff and the girls to go over. But the good news in our family is they're finally getting back out on their own. Um, the been good time with them as they've gone through this journey together, and I appreciate them being willing to come home and spend time with us after they've moved out and be able to still get out on their own. So that's the good news from them. They have found a place, and it will take them at least a week. I think it's next Saturday that the girls expect their church to help them move and get most of the stuff over there. So tonight we are in the book of Joshua, the third chapter. We're going to start in verse 1. And this is the crossing of the Jordan. It's the first thing that the people of Israel do under Joshua. Verse 1. Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went through the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God and the priests who are Levites carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 1,000 yards between you and the ark. Do not go near it. Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. Joshua said to the priest, take up the Ark of the Covenant and pass on ahead of the people. So they took it up and went ahead of them. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so that they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priest to carry the Ark of the Covenant. When you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river. Joshua said to the Israelites, come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. See, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe, and as soon as the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, Ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priest carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowed down to the Sea of the Arabah, the Salt Sea. It was completely cut off, so the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. Interesting. There's been several times in history where rock slides have dammed the Jordan and it's gone dry for a period of time till the water crests the temporary dam that the rock slide causes, and then it flows freely again. The place that's mentioned is one of those places that is geologically such that it can happen there. It's not amazing in one sense that God used natural means to dam the river up. The Jordan is in the middle of a rift valley. It is an active geological zone. It does continue to widen and deepen, and the Jordan flows through it, and the cliffs do get higher and they do fall off, and you know it's a continual cycle. And a few thousand years we've watched the Jordan River. It's happened several times. The miracle is not that God caused a cliff to fall off and dam the river. The miracle is the moment it happened, exactly at the right time. Um, the priests didn't know anything about that. They just were following Joshua's command and went to the river, and the river stopped flowing. And they were walking across dry land. Um, how does the people of Israel know that the water was in a heap upstream? Well, they heard from the natives of the land. It's further away than they can see. They would not have been able to see from Jericho where this was. It's enough miles upstream. They couldn't see it. They couldn't, they wouldn't know about it. They would just know that the water turned dry. It flowed down to the Salt Sea, to the Dead Sea, as we call it, and they were able to cross on dry land. It was flood stage. It was during the harvest. The fall rains had come um, up in the hills. It hadn't started yet raining in the agricultural lands because it didn't rain there until later in the winter. And after they got the next crop planted for the winter wheat, the winter rye planted, winter oats planted, depending upon where they were and exactly what they grew. But at this point in time, they're still harvesting. They're still busy out in the fields. It's not yet time for the rain. It's time to harvest the crops and get them in before it starts raining in the plains, in the lower hills. But up in the mountains, up in Lebanon, where the rains come earlier, it's already started raining, and the water is flooding the Jordan. And it's the time of year when it's not crossable. And here, at the right moment, it happens. And they can cross. And we'll learn in chapter 4, at the right moment, the dam breaks and the water flows back. That's kind of the way that rock slide dams are. This is, you know, how God, the mechanics of how God did it is not the interesting part. It's the timing. And notice Joshua has heard from God, knows exactly what's fixing to happen, gives people commands. Follow the ark because you don't know where to go. And the priests are going to be the one leading the way until the middle of the Jordan they were. They stood there while everybody crossed over. He also prepared people. They were going to get 12 memorial stones out of the center of the river and make a memorial on the other side to memorialize that they crossed the Jordan. This is the second time the people of Israel are going to cross through a body of water that was uncrossable. They passed through the Sea of Reeds with Moses. Now they're going to cross the Jordan. Jordan is less of an obstacle. They were crossing at the fords where it was more passable. But, and after the fords, the river got steeper. That's why the water runs off quickly there and they could pass on dry ground. Um, Dry ground there at the fords, the geology is such that there's a stronger rocky uh, geological layer there, and the bottom is basically rock. So as soon as the water runs off, it's dry ground. Uh, they can walk across. The animals can walk across. There's no mud, particularly during flood stage. Uh, during other parts of the year, you get some deposition of sediment, but during the flood stage, it's going to be washing the sediment on downstream. And there's a spot there where it's possible to cross very easily. Uh, and that's part of why it was the ford, where you forded across the Jordan, because that was the spot, and it was therefore shallower water there. Downstream was steeper and flowed out quicker. Upstream, you had a deeper river channel and softer bottom, and so it wasn't easy to ford. Right there at Jericho, that's why Jericho was where it was. It was at the ford of the Jordan. Um, you could ford the river if it wasn't in flood stage. If it was in flood stage, it was obviously too deep, flowing too fast. But if you have a temporary dam upstream, the water runs off quickly, you're able to cross on rock. And let's face it, 2.5 million people plus all the livestock. If there was little mud puddles here and there and yonder, it got stepped in and walked over. And probably that many feet got carried to the other side on a little bit of moisture in everybody's sandals, kind of thing. Nothing, you know, by the time they got finished, you know, it was pavement. Uh, so, Bible's literally true there. Chapter 4. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priest stood, and to carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you in the future when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, and the stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." So God had told Joshua to do this. He'd prepared the men. He told them again, go send the men out. They did. They got the 12 stones. They got it from where the priests were standing. Um, and then they carried them to the other side. They were going to build there to build a memorial where they camped that night. There is a spot there in Israel that is the spot where the locals say this is where the memorial was built. There is not 12 stones there anymore. They've disappeared through history. Israelites have not had possession of the land completely. And some of the other people, if they knew about it, didn't care, or if they knew about it, actually actively opposed it. Um, we don't know when the memorial disappeared, but when this book was written, it was still there. When very possibly during the time of the judges, some of the raiding parties would have taken a memorial apart. Uh, it was the kind of petty things that the Middle East fights, wars would have allowed. Um, if you watch the Middle East in the wars today, you know that they sometimes do petty things like that. At one point in time, there was a memorial built of 12 stones carried from the center of the river. The implication here is each stone was as big as a man who did physical labor all his life could carry. That they didn't pick, pebbles up. They didn't pick fist-sized stones up. They were wanting to memorialize their tribe in the memorial. And so big strong men would have been picked, and they would have shown out how big they could carry, kind of thing. And these were men used to hauling their goods around the desert for 40 years, being the pack animals. Um, and the technology was not light, you know, wool and skin and leather and stuff like that for tents, for dwellings. Um, the cookware would have been heavy. A lot of it would have been pottery. Can you imagine carrying pottery cookware around to cook? Yeah, these men were strong, and they would have gotten to show out their strength in front of everybody. And the bigger the stone they picked up for their tribe, the bigger their tribe's part of the memorial would be. Um, and they 12 men would have been egging each other on. So they're considerably carrying considerably big stones, um, easily 50 pounds or 100 pounds of stone each. Um, Verse 8. So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua. And they carried them over with them to their camp, where they put them down. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and they are there to this day. Now the priests who carried the ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything the Lord had commanded Joshua was done by the people, just as Moses had directed Joshua. The people hurried over, and as soon as all of them had crossed, the ark of the Lord and the priests came to the other side while the people watched. The men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over armed in front of the Israelites, as Moses had directed them. About 40,000 armed for battle crossed over before the Lord at the plains of Jericho for war. That day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they revered him all the days of his life, just as they had revered Moses. Important point here. Moses was not originally revered. By this point in time, he's revered. But in the beginning, they were a fractious, rebellious bunch, complaining that they'd been better off. And never mind they'd been complaining about being slaves in Egypt for over 40 years. They'd been complaining about it when Moses was born, and he was 40 years old when he had to flee. He was 40 years in the desert and in Sinai desert to come back. So they've been complaining about being slaves for at least 80 years. And when he gets them out in the desert, the first thing they do is, we'd been better off in Egypt being slaves than being out here. And yeah, they didn't revere Moses to start with. 40 years later, he's revered. But this is a different group of people. They're the children. They've heard growing up all the stories that their parents told them about all the miracles. And they've come to revere Moses. And that day they saw God do a miracle. And they revered Joshua because he was God's man. And they honored him all the days that he was alive. They never left that. God knew what he was doing with the 40 years in the desert. He was taking a bunch of people who were complainers and couldn't follow and turn them into a nation that would follow its leader. And they would correctly respect its leader. He didn't let the people that weren't going to obey him come into the land of promise. Only their children. And the people that could obey God did. And he changed their hearts of this people so that when they saw the miracle, they accepted it as a miracle of God and knew that God was with them. And they were ready to do what God told them to do. In fact, they were so ready to do that the people who already had homeland sent their men, left their towns essentially unprotected, and sent their army out ahead of everybody else so that there would be they would help with the armed fight. And they're going to proceed to do battle, and everybody's going to go back to their own home afterwards. They already have theirs. It would have been easy for them to say, "Oh, we've got ours. You go get yours. Thanks for the help, but we're not going to help you." No, they were willing, and they followed Joshua, and they did. And 40,000 men armed for battle carried it up. Verse 15. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Command the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant come up out of the Jordan." So Joshua commanded the priests, "Come up out of the Jordan." And the priests came up out of the river, carrying the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. No sooner had they set their feet on the dry ground than the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and ran at flood stages before. So, everybody got over in one day. When the Jordan's the flood stage there, it can be a mile wide or more. Imagine 2.5 million people walking, carrying all their stuff, driving their herds ahead of them, crossing through a narrow spot in the valley. A mile wide area, and cross over it and get across in a day. They were organized, they were quick, they were trying hard, and God kept the water up just long enough they could get across. And then they saw the flood come back. They knew they had just seen a miracle. They crossed a flooded river. No, nothing was lost. They were all on the other side safely. Verse 19. On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, "In the future, when your descendants ask their fathers, what do these stones mean? Tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan just as he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the people of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you will always fear the Lord your God." So they crossed the Jordan. They set up the memorial there where they camped that first night. And it was to be a memorial to all time that the Lord had performed a miracle there. They were in their own land. Now memorials meant something. And so they had, it set up a memorial. This is the first memorial they're going to set up. They're going to set up some others. The tale of Joshua is full of memorials. God was beginning to get them to understand that they would be here permanently and they would need to memorialize the things he'd done for them. Not just write them down, because most people were illiterate. Not just pass them on by word of mouth where gossip and stuff could change the story and make it grander than it was, or change the meaning or whatever. No, they were going to set up physical memorials to point out this is the miracle God had done. And this is the first one. And so then God still has to prepare the people. They've got to become his people, obeying his law. They've spent 40 years in the desert preparing for this moment. They've got to where they're going to obey Joshua. They're going to obey what he says to do. But they have not always practiced like they should what God told them to do at Mount Sinai. Chapter 5, verse 1. Now when the Amorite kings west of the Jordan, all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until we had crossed over, their hearts melted, and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites. At that time the Lord said to Joshua, "Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again." So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gibeath Haraloth. Now this is why he did so. All those who came out of Egypt, all the men of military age, died in the desert on the way after leaving Egypt. All the people that had come out had been circumcised, but the people born in the desert during the journey from Egypt had not. The Israelites had moved about in the desert 40 years until all the men who were of military age when they left Egypt had died, since they had not obeyed the Lord. For the Lord had sworn to them that they would not see the land he had solemnly promised their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So he raised up their sons in their place, and these were the ones Joshua circumcised. They were still uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. And after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained where they were in camp until they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua, Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you, so the place is to be called Gilgal to this day. On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. The day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate of the produce of Canaan. So they got there at harvest time. When they harvested the crop they didn't plant, that was somebody else's food, God stopped the manna. They were in the promised land. They didn't need his miraculous food every day. They were able to eat from the produce of the land. In fact, they're going to conquer enough people. They're going to basically have the food of the land. They're going to have to work for it. They're going to have to harvest it. They're going to have to store it, etc. But they're going to have it. It's going to be available. And as soon as they started eating from the land, they no longer had manna to pick up and eat. I don't think this bothered a whole lot of people. Just being able to eat it. Also, I find it curious. Along the way, they had the Mosaic law. They had the tradition handed down from Abraham that they should be circumcising their sons on the 8th day. But they hadn't done so. So God orders Joshua to get them all circumcised so that they would be a circumcised people and obedient to God again. And they do so. And they stay till they heal up. As soon as they heal up, then they have the Passover. When they have the Passover, then they start harvesting the crops from the land, and the manna dries up and it stops. And they are now to prepare their own food, get their own food. It is the beginning of them becoming people living in the land of Canaan, in their promised land. They haven't conquered anybody yet. They're literally camping somebody's field who's not daring to come out and challenge them. It's been, 3 weeks or so since they crossed the Jordan. Nothing seems to have happened. But they're obeying God. And they've started obeying the circumcision law. They've started eating the produce of the land, so they no longer need miraculous food. And that miracle stops. And the people start working for their living again. They're out of the desert again. They're in the land of promise. They still have a lot of work ahead of them, but they know that God is good and God is providing for them because it's there. The food is there. Verse 13. Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, Are you for us or for our enemies? Neither, he replied, but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come. Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, What message does my Lord have for his servant? The commander of the Lord's armies replied, Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. Now Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. yeah, they were in siege mode with their crops in the field ripe, needing harvesting. That's why the Israelites could eat. They were harvesting the crops of the people that lived in Jericho. Um, what a bad time to be trapped in your city in a siege. You can see the enemy out there harvesting your crops, living on your crops, and you don't have them. You're still depending upon last year's food. They have to be pretty desperate in Jericho. Um, they see that if it, you know, that the Israelites can last a whole lot longer than they can. This siege isn't going to last long um, if they attack. You know, and they're pretty worried. Verse 2. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the seventh day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a loud blast on the trumpets, have all the people give a loud shout, and the wall of the city will collapse, and the people will go up, every man straight in." So, before they start marching around, God has told Joshua what to do. They're going to march around the city for 6 days, once each day. And on the seventh day, you're going to march around it 7 times. So they're going to march around that city 13 times in a week. And then the 13th time, the priests are going to give a loud blow on the trumpets, and everybody's going to shout. And when they shout, the walls are going to fall down. Now, um, well-built walls don't fall down because somebody shouts at them. They don't fall down because there's trumpets blowing. Battles in that day were noisy. Um, Men shouted, armor clanked, swords clanked against each other and against armor, and uh, it was noisy. And walls were made to withstand weather and shifting soil and earthquakes. And in fact, a typical wall at that day and time, you had stone walls built on either side of the wall. In between, um, soil and rock and gravel was packed in between it. And the faces then were covered in a flat rock, um, so that it was not possible to scale the outside of the wall. Inside the wall was then very often built, um, you know, dwellings and homes up against it, so that the town wall was the back wall of the house. And then this, they'd have basically a road built on top of the wall, so that the defenders could be up on top of the wall and have a good view over. And if somebody tried to scale the wall, you could, you had height on them, and while they were busy trying to climb, you could drop a stone on them or shoot them with an arrow or throw a spear into them or something. You know, made attacking a city that had a wall very hard. Um, they didn't have siege engines at the time, so you couldn't build, say, something that threw big rocks at the wall and battered it down. That was a later invention. In fact, from scriptures, King Hezekiah that did that first invented them, or his engineers did. Um, that it was basically a fairly much impenetrable defense. You could stay inside, and as long as you had plenty of food and water, you just did your daily life, and a few men on the wall defended it, and it would be very hard. In fact, the classical way to defeat a wall like that is the invading army would build, basically build a ramp from their camp all the way up to the top of the wall. And of course, they would have to have defensive fortifications on the end, protecting them while they did the work. And the soldiers on the wall would be, shooting arrows and throwing spears and throwing rocks and things like that to try to discourage it and prevent it and kill people that were doing the work. And, Uh, it was dangerous. It was hard. It was backbreaking work. You couldn't defend yourself. Um, you know, your chance of dying doing it were high, and you still didn't get to attack the enemy. And once you finally did uh, build siege works up to the wall, then you had to go into battle and fight people who had been, you know, watching you get there and knew where you were going to cross. It was hard work. Uh, the walls falling down. Nobody expected the walls to fall down. Walls just didn't fall down. And Joshua's telling the people, yeah, all the walls are going to fall down all around the whole city, not just in a spot. We're not going to go through a narrow spot or the defenders are on the wall attacking. No, they're every man that's all the way around the city that's completely surrounding the city in a siege is just going to run straight up in the city because the wall's just going to fall in. And of course, do a lot of damage falling in on itself, by itself. Verse 6. So Joshua son of Nun called the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord, have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it. And he ordered the people, advance, march around the city with the armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord. When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time the trumpets were sounding, but Joshua had commanded the people, do not give a war cry, do not raise your voices, do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout, then shout. So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. Then the people returned to camp and spent the night there. Day 1 happened. They walked around the city, they went back to camp, they camped. Verse 12. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord and blowing the trumpets. The armed men ahead of them and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord while the trumpets kept sounding. So on the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. So, first 6 days of the week, they do that. 7th day. Verse 15. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on the day they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, the priest sounded the trumpet blast. Joshua commanded the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold, all the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. So he gave them specific instructions. You're going to get plunder, you're going to get booty, it's going to come, but the people are devoted to destruction. That was a term where you were supposed to, normally applied to animals, kill the animal. In this case, the people of the city. They were foul and evil, and their religion was contemptible. And they were to be wiped out so that the religion would be wiped out. And so they were to be devoted to destruction. And then all the precious things in the city were to be given to the Lord. Now, foodstuffs and clothing and cloth and things like that could be taken by the ordinary people. But the gold and precious stones and silver and things like that were to be given to the Lord. Verse 20. When the trumpet sounded, the people shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the people gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed, so every man charged straight in, and they took the city. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. Joshua said to the two men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother and brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and gold into the treasury of the Lord's house. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the people, among the Israelites to this day. At that time Joshua pronounced this solemn oath: "Cursed before the Lord is the man who undertakes to rebuild this city Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn son will he lay its foundations, at the cost of his youngest will he set up its gates." So Joshua, Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. I'm going to stop there. We've covered chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6 tonight. They crossed the Jordan. A mighty miracle happened, and they got to see a flood stage river dry up, then walk across, and go back to flood stage immediately after them leaving. They worshiped the Lord. They started obeying the Lord. He quit providing them with the miracle of manna every day. They could start eating the produce of the land because it was harvest time. And they conquered a city, not with military might, but with another miracle. They simply walked around it 13 times, one time each day for 6 days, and then 7 days on the seventh day. So 7 times on the seventh day. So 13 times total. The wall was still sound. It was still there. And then the priest blew the trumpets some more, again in a specialized signal, and the people shouted, and the walls fell in. And then every man went straight up into the city, and they conquered. They took the valuables out and put them in the treasury of the Lord. They burned the houses. They burned things like that. They were supposed to burn everything. To sterilize the land. We're gonna look in chapter 7 about what happened when they didn't obey Joshua. One of the few times that the Israelites didn't obey Joshua, and they didn't, the people didn't obey the Lord. But it turns out well, because the people learn from it, and they don't do that again. They do exactly what God tells them to do. But that's chapter 7. I don't want to get that tonight. It's longer than we have tonight. But they started seeing that God was going to prepare the way. Jericho was a fairly good sized city. It was probably the third largest city in Canaan. Once they conquered it, the people, the Canaanites, knew this isn't going to be easy. God's with them. They were scared. And we have the Rahabites become part of the people of Israel. They first put them outside the camp because they were not clean. They were not clean people. They would become people of Israel. Rahab was I think, the great-grandmother of Boaz, who was the great-grandfather of David, who was in the line that produced the Christ. So, they're important to the salvation story. God had sent the spies in to get her out, to get her safely out, so that redemption history could happen the way it's supposed to, and that we could know that it's not bloodlines that God accepts, but faith. She had faith in Yahweh even though she hadn't got any commands from Moses. She just saw the world around her and knew what was happening, and negotiated so that she could share in the blessing too. In fact, after the Babylonian captivity, the Rechabites were one of the larger clans to come out. They had stayed faithful to God in captivity and had prospered and done exactly what God told the Israelites to do. Um, so it's a very interesting group of people, and the young men brought them out, and they became an important clan in Israel, uh, and because they trusted God. Gracious Father, we do thank you that you are a God who fulfills your promises. You told Joshua what to do. He told the people to do it, and the people followed it, and it turned out exactly as you said. At this point, we've seen two miracles as you've led them to start going into the land and conquering it, and they did exactly what you told them to do, and they protected Rahab and her family, but they killed everything else. They burned the city. Um, Joshua pronounced a curse on it. In fact, that curse had to be from you because uh, we'll find out later when we study when Jericho was rebuilt. It was absolutely true that it happened exactly like he said. You were in that curse on the city, and Jericho was eventually rebuilt, and it happened. The curse on it happened exactly the way that Joshua said. Lord, we thank you for being a God of history, and even when you don't seem to be working much, have us trust you that you are working in history even now. In your gracious name, amen. I hope to see you Wednesday at the discussion on Wednesday evening. And if I don't, I hope to see you here again next week. Have a good week.